All I want for codemas is you to code this case with me. Today I want to go over something that's more just diagnosis based. So I have here a sample assessment and plan that I put together where it's just diagnosis. And I want to demonstrate with this the importance of not only knowing your abbreviations, because this one is just abbreviations except for this little foot ulcer here, and the importance of understanding your coding guidelines. Now, if we were to look at this just from the aspect of, oh, we're going to go down and code each of these individually, if we just coded hypertension, CHF, end-stage renal disease, diabetes, foot ulcer, and hyperlipidemia, and isolated those out and just went down the line and coded those individually, we would actually be very, very inaccurate in the way this is coding. We could actually lose reimbursement in some of our quality payment programs and risk adjustment because we would not be meeting the HCCs that we need. So it's important to understand that there is a lot more to coding than just going down the line and assigning a code because you looked it up in the book and understanding those guidelines. So if I were to assign the code for hypertension, it would be I-10, but we want to understand first those hypertension guidelines. So let's start there. In ICD-10-CM, there's assumed cause and effect relationships between hypertension and heart disease, hypertension and chronic kidney disease, unless there's provider documentation specifically saying, oh, the patient has hypertension and heart disease, but the heart disease is not related to the hypertension, it's related to something else. So these are assumed to be related. Hypertension and any heart condition classified to the I-50 category, or these sections here, are assumed to be related. And instead of assigning I-10 and that I-50 or I-51 type code, we assign the I-11, which is hypertensive heart disease. And then if they have hypertension and chronic kidney disease, we assign I-12 instead of the different codes for the hypertension isolated and then the chronic kidney disease isolated. And then if they have all of them, hypertensive heart and chronic kidney disease, we don't use either of these. We actually just use I-13. Now we would still use the code to identify the type of heart disease and the stage of the chronic kidney disease. You can see that when you look up those codes in the tabular list. So it says here too in the guidelines that you would want to make sure you use that N18 code to identify the type of heart disease. The other thing I want to mention is if you have the AAPC edition of the ICD-10-CM manual, they do have a diagram here that you can utilize. Hypertension with heart disease, yes. Associated with CKD, let's say yes. Type of heart disease failure, heart disease, and then it basically draws you down to what you're supposed to be coding in these situations. So for ours, we would go here hypertension with chronic kidney disease, yes. Associated heart disease, yes. Type of heart disease and chronic kidney disease, we have heart disease and CKD stage 5 or end-stage renal disease. So we have I-1311, stage of chronic kidney disease N18.5 or N18.6. So instead of doing these all separate, we're going to start with our I-13 code, and then we're going to need something to identify our stage of end-stage renal disease, which is an N18 code. So we have a few selections here. We have hypertensive heart and chronic kidney disease without heart failure, but we do have heart failure. They have congestive heart failure, and that's stage 1 through stage 4 chronic kidney disease or unspecified chronic kidney disease. We have hypertensive heart and chronic kidney disease without heart failure, stage 5. That's not us either. And then we have hypertensive heart disease and chronic kidney disease with heart failure and stage 5 chronic kidney disease or end-stage renal disease. And then it tells us to use an additional code for the type of heart failure, an additional code for the stage of chronic kidney disease. So we're going to use this I-13.2. We're going to use our N18 code to identify the stage. I can tell you offhand, I already know it's 6 for end stage. And that's because that fourth digit kind of follows the stage. So stage 1 is 0.1, stage 2 is 0.2, and then stage 5 is 0.5, and then after that is end stage, so that's 0.6. So just in case you don't believe me, there is the N18 end-stage renal disease, chronic kidney disease requiring dialysis, and it says to use an additional code to identify dialysis status. So likely this patient is on dialysis if they do have end-stage renal disease, because that is one of the qualifications of having end-stage renal disease. And then we still need our level of congestive heart failure. And then here we have it, I-50.9, heart failure, congestive heart failure not otherwise specified. So I-59, I'll make this an I like that so we can designate that that's not a 1. And then now we have diabetes mellitus. So there's some assumed cause and effect relationships with diabetes as well. In the case of diabetes, anything that appears under the word with in the alphabetic index, you can assume is linked even in the absence of provider documentation specifically linking them, unless again the provider says that they're not related, that the diabetes and the foot ulcer are not related. So in this case, if we go down our diabetes list here, it says chronic kidney disease and gives us E11.22. And that's our more specific type of diabetes. Now we can use as many different diabetic codes as we need to if they have, for example, diabetic foot ulcer and diabetic gangrene and diabetic ketoacidosis. We could use all 3 of those codes. What we can't essentially do with diabetes is use a specified type of diabetes, like diabetes with foot ulcer, but then also use the unspecified diabetes code, because we can't use an unspecified code with a specified code. Either they specified what type it was or they didn't specify what type it was. So in this case, we have that diabetes code with the chronic kidney disease, and we also have on here a foot ulcer. So E11.621. And we'll go verify both of these in the tabular list. So here is our E11.22, type 2 diabetes with chronic kidney disease. It tells us to use an additional code to identify the stage, which we already did. It doesn't look like we need any additional characters there. So when we go to our E11.621 here, it does tell us to use an additional code to identify the site of the ulcer, and it tells us L97.4 or L97.5. So we'll put here our L97 and we'll see what we got here. So we have L97529, non-pressure chronic ulcer of other part of left foot with unspecified severity. And then all we have left is HLD, which is hyperlipidemia. So E78.5, and then we'll verify that in our tabular list. And there it is, E78.5, hyperlipidemia unspecified. So if we were going to code this straight down and just coded each of these 6 conditions, instead we actually have how many conditions? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different diagnosis codes for these 6 entries. So that's why it's really important to understand those guidelines, to look things up in the tabular list, to go and check those additional, not only digits, but instructions that are in your ICD-10-CM book. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, I would really appreciate it if you give it a big thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you'll get alerts when I post new episodes. I will see you in the next episode, and until then, just keep on coding on.